Captain Michael Drake stood motionless before the curved observation window of the Eternal Seeker, his crystalline eyes reflecting Earth's swirling atmosphere below. 20 years of galactic survey experience hadn't prepared him for what his sensors were telling him. This was supposed to be routine. Another pre-FTL civilization catalog entry, another box checked in humanity's developmental timeline. "Captain, you need to see this." Lieutenant James Morrison's voice crackled through the ship's internal communications. The young officer's usually calm demeanor had an edge of excitement that made Drake raise an eyebrow. Drake made his way through the ship's pristine white corridors, his boots silent against the energy-absorbing floor. The bridge was a symphony of holographic displays, each showing different aspects of Earth's technological footprint. Morrison stood at the central console, his fingers dancing through the data streams. "Look at these energy signatures," Morrison said, pulling up a three-dimensional map of Earth's orbital space. "It's like nothing we've ever seen in a pre-FTL society." The display showed thousands of points of light, satellites, space debris, and various human-made objects, creating a complex web around their planet. But it wasn't the quantity that caught Drake's attention. It was the pattern. Where other developing civilizations showed orderly, progressive steps in their space development, Earth's orbital space was chaos given form. "They've got everything up there," Morrison continued, his voice rising with each point. "Communication satellites using both digital and quantum protocols. Primitive AI systems running independent of ground control. And, sir, some of these devices are using principles we don't fully understand." Drake leaned closer to the display. "Explain." "Take this one." Morrison highlighted a small cluster of satellites. "They're using what they call quantum entanglement for communication, but their approach is different. Less efficient than ours, but somehow more flexible. They're doing things the hard way, but in doing so, they've stumbled upon applications we never considered." Dr. Amanda Hayes, the ship's technologist, chose that moment to enter the bridge. Her usually perfectly maintained appearance was slightly disheveled, a clear sign she'd been deep in her research. "Captain, we have another anomaly. Their global information network. They call it the Internet. It's not just a communication tool. It's evolving." Drake turned to face her, noting the intense look in her eyes. "Evolving how?" "They've created a digital ecosystem that's growing beyond their original design. Their primitive AI systems are interacting with it in ways that shouldn't be possible at their technology level. It's like they built a highway system before inventing the wheel, and somehow it works." The captain returned his gaze to the blue planet below. Standard protocol was clear: observe, document, and move on. But nothing about this was standard. "Run a full spectrum analysis," he ordered. "I want to know everything. How they built their technology tree, what patterns they followed, and most importantly, how they're achieving these results with their current technological limitations." "Sir," Morrison interjected, "that's against standard survey protocols. We're only supposed to do surface scans of pre-FTL civilizations." Drake smiled, a rare expression that transformed his usually stern features. "Lieutenant, look at that planet. Look at what they're doing down there. They're breaking every development pattern we've ever documented. Maybe it's time we break a few rules of our own." As the crew began their detailed analysis, Drake remained at the window. The Eternal Seeker hung silently in space, its advanced cloaking technology making it invisible to Earth's detection systems. Below, 7 billion humans went about their lives, unaware that their unconventional path to the stars had caught the attention of those who had already reached them. Something was different about this species. They weren't following the normal rules of technological development, and Drake intended to find out why. As night fell over North America, he watched the continent light up with millions of artificial stars, each one a testament to humanity's refusal to wait for the natural order of progress. "Well," he whispered to the quiet bridge, This is going to be interesting. Dr. Amanda Hayes' laboratory aboard the Eternal Seeker had never been so cluttered. Holographic displays covered every available surface, each one streaming different aspects of human technological development. She'd been awake for 36 hours straight, but sleep was the furthest thing from her mind. "This shouldn't work," she muttered, manipulating a three-dimensional model of a human quantum computer. "They're still using silicon-based processing units, for heaven's sake. It's like building a skyscraper out of popsicle sticks." The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Captain Drake entered, carrying 2 steaming cups of synthesized caffeine. "Talk to me, Amanda. What's got you breaking every work-rest protocol we have?" She accepted the cup gratefully, her eyes never leaving the displays. "Look at this, Michael. They've developed neural networks before mastering fusion power. They're running quantum calculations on hardware that should be too primitive to handle it. Everything about their development is wrong." "Wrong how?" "Species usually follow a pretty standard progression," she said, pulling up a comparative timeline. "Master fire, develop agriculture, industrial revolution, digital age, fusion power, then AI and quantum computing. But humans," she laughed, a sound of both frustration and admiration. "They're doing everything at once, and somehow making it work." Drake watched as she brought up another display, this one showing what appeared to be entertainment content. "What's this?" "This is the most fascinating part." Amanda's eyes lit up. "They call it science fiction. It's entertainment, but it's also more than that. They're using these stories to theorize about technologies they can't build yet, and some of these theories." She trailed off, shaking her head in disbelief. "How accurate are they?" "That's just it." She pulled up a specific file. "This is from something called Star Trek, created over 50 years ago. Their theoretical framework for matter transportation is surprisingly valid. They can't build it yet, but they've imagined it so thoroughly that they've accidentally stumbled upon several quantum principles we didn't discover until after we had the technology." Drake leaned against a console, his expression thoughtful. "They're working backwards." "Exactly," Amanda exclaimed. "Most species develop technology step by step, building on what they know. Humans, they dream up the end result first, then try to figure out how to make it work. It's completely backward, highly inefficient, and," she gestured at the displays, "surprisingly effective." A new alert flashed across one of the screens. Amanda quickly pulled up the data, her eyes widening. "Oh, this is interesting. They're running an experiment at something called CERN. They're looking for particles we haven't even told them exist yet." Drake moved closer to the display. "Will they find them?" "Their equipment is too primitive," Amanda said, but her voice held a note of uncertainty. "But then again, they shouldn't be able to do half the things they're already doing. It's like they don't understand the concept of technological limitations." She brought up a new series of displays, these showing various human research projects around the globe. "Look at this. They're simultaneously working on neural interfaces, artificial intelligence, quantum teleportation, and even primitive antimatter production. Any one of these projects should be beyond their current technological level, but they keep pushing forward anyway. And sometimes succeeding," Drake asked. "More often than they should," Amanda admitted. "It's like watching children build a fusion reactor out of spare parts. It shouldn't work, but they're so determined to make it work that they find ways around their limitations." Drake was silent for a long moment, watching the streams of data flow across the displays. Finally, he asked, "What do you think this means for their future development?" Amanda took a long sip of her drink before answering. "Honestly, I have no idea. They're not following any known development pattern. They're just charging ahead in every direction at once. It's beautiful chaos." "Beautiful chaos," Drake repeated softly. "That might be the best description of humanity," I've heard yet. Lieutenant James Morrison had always prided himself on his emotional control, but right now, his hands were shaking as he stared at his terminal screen. He'd been tasked with a routine scan of Earth's digital networks, a standard procedure for cataloging pre-FTL civilizations. What he'd found instead had him questioning everything he thought he knew about technological development. "Computer," he called out, his voice slightly hoarse. "Cross-reference these papers with our current FTL theory database." The holographic display flickered as thousands of human scientific papers flew past, each one being compared against the Galactic Survey's vast knowledge base. Red highlights indicated completely wrong theories, yellow for partially correct ones, and green for... Morrison blinked. There shouldn't be any green. "Captain Drake," he called through the ship's communication system, "I need you in the analysis lab. Immediately." When Drake arrived minutes later, Morrison was still going through the papers, his expression a mix of disbelief and excitement. "Sir, remember how Dr. Hayes found those science fiction stories that accidentally got some things right?" Drake nodded, moving to stand behind Morrison's chair. "Well, I decided to do a deep scan of their academic databases, looking for any theoretical papers that might show similar insights." Morrison pulled up a specific document. "This is a paper by Dr. Thomas Anderson from something called MIT. It's a theoretical framework for what they call quantum slipstream propulsion." "Another fiction story?" Drake asked. "No, sir. This is pure theory, published in a peer-reviewed journal. And according to our systems," Morrison highlighted the green sections, "roughly 40% of the mathematical framework is correct. They've theorized elements of FTL travel that took our civilization centuries to discover after we'd already achieved light speed." Drake leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, as he studied the equations. "How is this possible?" "It gets better," Morrison said, pulling up more documents. "Or worse, depending on your perspective. They've got thousands of these papers. Most are wrong, some hilariously so, but hidden among them." He gestured at the screen, where more green highlights were appearing. "They're piecing together the puzzle without having the technology to test any of it. Show me the most advanced theories you found." Morrison nodded and brought up a new series of papers. "This one's fascinating. A group of physicists from something called CERN have proposed a method of manipulating quantum fields. That's..." "Sir, it's similar to how our own drives work, but they're approaching it from a completely different angle." Drake read through the paper, his expression growing more serious with each page. "They've never built any of this." "They can't," Morrison confirmed. "Their current technology level is at least a century away from being able to test these theories. But sir," he hesitated, then plunged ahead, "some of their approaches are novel. They're coming at the problems from directions our scientists never considered." The captain was silent for a long moment, processing the implications. "How many of these papers have you found?" "Thousands, and that's just from the last few decades. They've been theorizing about faster-than-light travel since before they had electronic computers. Most of it is wrong, but..." Morrison shook his head in wonder. "The sheer volume of their theoretical work is staggering. They're taking every possible approach, testing every idea on paper, even the ones that seem impossible. And sometimes," Drake said softly, "the impossible ones turn out to be right." "Exactly, sir. It's like they're building a library of dreams, and some of those dreams..." Morrison gestured at the green highlighted sections. "Some of them are actually blueprint for technologies they don't even know are possible yet." Drake straightened up, his decision made. "Keep digging. I want every paper, every theory, every wild hypothesis they've published about space travel. Flag anything that shows even partial correlation with known technologies." "Sir," Morrison said carefully, "that's far beyond our survey parameters." Drake's expression was firm. "Lieutenant, I think we both know this stopped being a standard survey the moment we entered this system. Captain Drake stood before the assembled senior staff in the Eternal Seeker's main conference room. The tension was palpable as holographic displays showed the results of their recent investigations into human scientific development. What had started as a routine survey had become something unprecedented in the Galactic Survey's history. "I know what I'm about to propose goes against everything in the manual," Drake began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "But I think we're dealing with something the manual never contemplated." Dr. Rachel Anderson, the ship's historian, leaned forward in her chair. Her usually neat auburn hair was slightly disheveled from hours of research. "Captain, I've been going through their historical records. The pattern is unlike anything we've ever encountered." She stood and walked to the central display, bringing up a timeline of human scientific development. Most species develop technologies in a linear fashion, building each new discovery on the foundation of previous ones. Humans, she shook her head in wonder. They dream it first, often centuries before they can build it. "Give us an example," Lieutenant Morrison asked, his eyes fixed on the timeline. "Take their space program," Rachel continued, zooming in on a specific period. In 1865, a writer named Jules Verne described in detail a moon mission that was remarkably similar to what they actually achieved a century later. They were still using steam engines when he wrote it, but the basic concepts were there. Dr. Hayes interrupted, her voice excited. "It's not just science fiction either. I found technical papers from the early 20th century theorizing about quantum mechanics before they had the tools to observe subatomic particles. They were right about things they shouldn't have even been able to guess at." Drake nodded slowly. "And now we've found their current theoretical work on FTL travel. Which brings us to the real issue." Commander Sarah Mitchell spoke up from her position near the door. As the ship's security officer, her concerns were more practical. "We're not supposed to do deep scans of pre-FTL civilizations. Every additional scan increases the risk of detection." "They're already looking for us," Morrison countered, pulling up new data. "Their SETI programs, their space telescopes, their theoretical work on interstellar communication. They're not just hoping to find other civilizations, they're actively preparing for first contact." The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. These humans weren't just developing technology. They were actively imagining and planning for a future they had no guarantee of reaching. "There's something else," Rachel said quietly, drawing everyone's attention back to her. "Their entertainment media, their literature, their scientific theories. They're all connected. Ideas flow from one to the other. A science fiction story inspires a scientist, who writes a theory, which inspires new stories, which lead to more research. It's a feedback loop unlike anything we've seen before." Drake moved to the center of the room, his decision already made but needing his crew to understand why. "We have two options. We can follow protocol, pack up our surface observations, and move on to the next survey target." He paused, looking each crew member in the eye. "Or we can do something that's never been done before. A full, deep-level analysis of a pre-FTL civilization that's already theorized half the technology they'd need for interstellar travel." "It's not just about the technology," Dr. Hayes added. "Their approach to problem-solving, their way of imagining solutions before they have the means to build them. We might learn as much from their methods as from their discoveries." Commander Mitchell frowned. "The penalties for breaking survey protocol are severe, Captain." "They are," Drake agreed. "But I think the potential benefits outweigh the risks. We're not just studying their past development. We're watching them build the future with their minds before they can build it with their hands." He looked around the room one more time, seeing the mix of concern and excitement on his crew's faces. "I'm not ordering any of you to participate in this. If anyone wants to register a formal objection, now's the time." The silence that followed was all the answer he needed. Dr. William Parker had never seen anything like it. As the ship's lead psychologist, he'd studied dozens of emerging civilizations, but the patterns he was seeing in human behavior defied every model he'd ever used. "Look at this," he said to Dr. Hayes, who had joined him in his study chamber. The wall-sized display showed a complex web of interconnected events, each node representing a major human scientific breakthrough. Their development pattern isn't just chaotic, it's deliberately experimental. Amanda leaned closer to the display, her eyes tracking the countless lines connecting different discoveries. "What do you mean by experimental?" "Most species," William explained, highlighting a section of the display, "will perfect one technology before moving to the next. It's logical, efficient. But humans," he gestured at the chaotic web before them, "they'll push forward with a dozen half-finished technologies at once, taking risks that should be catastrophic. And yet they survive." Amanda mused. "More than survive. They thrive on it." William brought up a new series of data points. When they hit a technical limitation in one area, instead of stopping or backing up, they jumped to another project entirely. Then, months or years later, they come back with new insights from their other experiments. The door slid open as Captain Drake entered, looking more energized than he had in days. "Tell me you found something good, Doctor." William nodded, a rare smile crossing his face. "I think I've figured out why they're so different from other pre-FTL species. It's not just their technology. It's their entire approach to progress." He adjusted the display, bringing up examples of human research projects from around their planet. Most species view technological limitations as absolute barriers. If you can't build it, you stop trying until you can. But humans, he chuckled, they view limitations as personal challenges. They don't accept no for an answer, Amanda added, beginning to see the pattern. "Exactly," William confirmed. "When they can't build something, they don't stop thinking about it. Instead, they create increasingly detailed theories, run thought experiments, write stories about it. They keep the ideas alive and growing even when they can't actually test them." Drake studied the display thoughtfully. "And this connects to their scientific development how? It's all about their problem-solving approach," William explained, pulling up specific examples. "Look at their space program. They knew they couldn't reach the moon when they started, but they broke the problem down into smaller challenges. Each small success built towards the larger goal, even when the final solution wasn't clear." He highlighted another section of the display. "And here's the really fascinating part. Their entertainment media actually accelerates their development. Their science fiction doesn't just predict future technologies. It creates a cultural environment where impossible things are seen as simply not possible yet." Amanda's eyes widened. "That's why they have so many competing theories for things they can't build yet. They're not waiting for the technology to catch up. They're preparing for it in advance." "Precisely," William said. "Other species might have one or two theoretical approaches to a problem. Humans will have hundreds, most of them wrong, but they keep them all. They never know which wild theory might turn out to be right." Drake moved closer to the display, his expression intent. "So when they finally develop the technology to test these theories, they'll have already explored most of the possible approaches," William finished. "It's inefficient, chaotic, and produces a lot of dead ends, but when they do find a solution, it's often one nobody else would have considered." Amanda concluded, the implications finally hitting her. "Because nobody else would have tried so many impossible approaches." William nodded, turning to face the captain. "Sir, we're not just looking at an emerging civilization. We're looking at a species that's already mentally prepared for technologies they won't develop for centuries. They've been practicing for the future in their minds for generations." Drake was silent for a long moment, taking it all in. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. then maybe it's time we help them turn some of those theories into reality. The main engineering bay of the Eternal Seeker had been transformed into something that would have made any Galactic survey inspector immediately revoke their operating license. Holographic displays showing human theoretical papers covered the walls, while the ship's quantum computer processed simulations at an unprecedented rate. "Are you sure about this?" Dr. Amanda Hayes asked, her fingers hovering over the final command input. She was about to feed Dr. Emily Thompson's controversial paper on quantum slipstream propulsion into their most advanced simulation systems. Captain Drake stood behind her, arms crossed. "We're already breaking every protocol in the book. Might as well be thorough about it." The paper in question had been rejected by most human scientific journals for being too speculative, a phrase that made both Amanda and Drake share a knowing look. The human scientific community had dismissed it as impossible with their current technology, but that wasn't the question they were trying to answer. "Running simulation," Amanda announced, her voice tense with anticipation. The quantum computer hummed to life, its crystalline core glowing as it processed the human theories through their most advanced physics models. Lieutenant Morrison monitored the secondary systems. Power consumption is within normal parameters. No signs of system strain. The first results started appearing on the main display. Amanda's eyes widened as she read through the data. This can't be right." She ran the numbers again, then a third time. "What are you seeing?" Drake asked, moving closer to the display. "The basic principles are sound," Amanda said, her voice filled with disbelief. "They're coming at the problem from a completely different angle than our scientists did, but..." She brought up a comparative analysis. "With some refinements, this could actually work." Morrison left his station to join them. "How efficient is it compared to our current systems?" Amanda's fingers flew over the controls, running the calculations. "That's the most amazing part. Once we account for the necessary technical adjustments and apply our current understanding of quantum mechanics." She paused, double-checking her results. "It shows a potential 30% improvement in drive efficiency." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. A pre-FTL civilization had theorized a more efficient drive system than the one currently used by the Galactic Survey. "How is this possible?" Morrison finally asked. "They've never even built a working FTL drive." "Maybe that's why," Drake said thoughtfully. "They're not constrained by what they think should work. They're free to consider possibilities that we might have dismissed because they didn't fit our existing models." Amanda nodded, already running more simulations. "Look at this section here." She highlighted a portion of the theory. "They're suggesting a method of quantum field manipulation that we never considered because it would be impossible with the technology available when we first developed FTL travel. But with current technology, it becomes not just possible, but more efficient," Drake finished. "They skipped over all the intermediate steps we took and went straight to an advanced solution. They just couldn't build it yet." Morrison shook his head in wonder. How many more theories like this are hidden in their scientific archives? "That's what we're going to find out," Drake said, his decision made. "Run every theory we found through the simulator. I want to know just how many other impossible things they've managed to figure out without being able to test them." Amanda was already pulling up more papers. "Sir, if we find more viable theories like this one..." "I know," Drake said, his voice firm. "It would challenge everything we think we know about technological development, and it would make it impossible to justify classifying them as a pre-FTL civilization." He watched as the simulation results continued to pour in, each one adding to the growing evidence that humanity's unique approach to science had led them to insights that no one had expected them to have. "Maybe," he added softly, "that's exactly what the galaxy needs right now." The emergency command meeting aboard the Eternal Seeker had been going for 3 hours. The ship's senior staff sat around the conference table, data displays floating above its polished surface, each showing different aspects of their unprecedented situation. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell stood at the head of the table, her security officer's training evident in her rigid posture. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," she said, her voice tense. "We're actually considering revealing ourselves to a pre-FTL civilization because they have some interesting theories." "Some interesting theories," Dr. Hayes countered, pulling up the simulation results. "Sarah, they've independently developed theoretical frameworks for technologies that took our civilization centuries to perfect after we achieved FTL travel. Their quantum slipstream concept alone could revolutionize interstellar transport." Commander Robert Wilson, the ship's executive officer who had been quietly observing until now, leaned forward. "The regulations are clear about contact with pre-FTL species. We'd be risking our commissions, possibly even criminal charges." "The regulations," Captain Drake said carefully, "were written with the assumption that technological development follows a linear path. These humans have shown us that's not always true." Dr. William Parker nodded in agreement. "They're not pre-FTL in their understanding, only in their manufacturing capabilities. Their minds are already among the stars. They just can't build the ships yet." "That's an important distinction," Morrison added, bringing up new data. "Look at their space programs. They're already planning Mars colonies, asteroid mining operations, even long-term projects for interstellar probes. They're not just dreaming. They're actively working toward these goals." Sarah shook her head. "But they're still decades away from achieving any of that. The regulations exist for a reason. Premature contact could be devastating to their development. Or," Amanda interjected, "we could be stunting their growth by not making contact. Their theoretical understanding is far beyond their current technology level, with some guidance on the engineering side." "That's exactly what the regulations are meant to prevent," Commander Wilson warned. "We can't just give advanced technology to a developing species." "What if we're not giving?" Drake asked, his question silencing the room. "What if this is an exchange?" Dr. Anderson, who had been analyzing historical records, spoke up. "They've been preparing for this moment for generations. Their literature, their science, their culture. First contact isn't just a possibility to them, it's an expectation. They've been having this conversation with themselves for centuries. Through their science fiction," William added. "They've explored every possible scenario, every potential outcome. They've been mentally preparing their entire species for meeting alien civilizations." Sarah's expression remained skeptical. "Mental preparation isn't the same as technological readiness." "No," Drake agreed. "But consider this. They've already theorized most of the technologies they'd need for interstellar travel. They're not starting from zero. They're starting from a place of theoretical understanding that far exceeds their current capabilities." Amanda brought up the latest simulation results. "And some of their theories, they're not just viable, they're innovative. They're coming up with solutions we never considered because we were too bound by our own technological development path." The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. Finally, Commander Wilson spoke, his voice thoughtful. "If we do this, how do we choose who to contact first?" "Their scientific community," Drake said without hesitation. "Specifically, the theorists whose work we've been studying. They're already halfway to understanding the principles we'd be sharing." Sarah looked around the table, seeing the growing consensus. "This goes against everything in our training." "Maybe," Drake replied. "That's exactly why we need to do it. These humans have shown us that sometimes the most significant breakthroughs come from questioning our established ways of thinking." He stood, looking each member of his crew in the eye. "We're not just making first contact with a new species. We're opening a dialogue with a civilization that's been reaching for the stars through pure imagination for generations. Maybe it's time we help them bridge the gap between theory and reality. The conference room at MIT's physics department was filled to capacity. Dr. Thomas Anderson had called an emergency meeting of his research team, though he hadn't explained why. The tension in the air was palpable as he stood before his colleagues, his hands gripping the podium tightly. "Before I begin," he said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to share, "I need everyone to turn off their phones and other recording devices. What I'm about to tell you." He paused, still barely believing it himself. "Well, it's going to change everything." In orbit above, Captain Drake watched the scene through the Eternal Seeker's advanced monitoring systems. Dr. Hayes stood beside him, her expression a mix of anxiety and excitement. "Are we sure about this group?" Drake asked, though he already knew the answer. They'd spent weeks vetting potential first contacts. "They're perfect," Amanda confirmed. "Dr. Anderson's team has been working on theoretical FTL physics for years. Their latest paper came remarkably close to describing our actual drive systems." Down in the conference room, Anderson was speaking again. "For the past month, I've been in contact with," he took a deep breath, "representatives from an advanced interstellar civilization." The room erupted in murmurs, but Anderson held up his hand. "I know how this sounds, but in about 30 seconds, you're going to understand why I called this meeting." He looked up at the ceiling and nodded. On the ship, Drake gave the signal. The Eternal Seeker's cloaking field shifted, creating a carefully controlled holographic projection in the conference room. The assembled scientists gasped as Captain Drake's image appeared before them. "Greetings, Dr. Anderson," Drake said, watching as the humans' expressions ranged from shocked to wonder to scientific curiosity. There was surprisingly little fear. A young physicist in the back raised her hand, as if this were any other academic presentation. "Your quantum field manipulation for that hologram. Are you using coherent state transfer or quantum teleportation?" Drake smiled. This was exactly why they'd chosen this group. "Actually, it's a hybrid system. I believe you'd find the principles similar to Dr. Thompson's paper on multi-phase quantum interfaces." More hands shot up, the initial shock quickly giving way to professional interest. These scientists weren't afraid of the unknown. They wanted to understand it. "We've been studying your theoretical work," Amanda said, her image appearing alongside Drake's. "Your understanding of space-time mechanics is remarkable, especially considering your current technology level." "But that's why we're here," Drake added. "We found something unique in how humanity approaches scientific discovery. You don't just build on what you know. You imagine what might be possible, and then work backward to achieve it." Anderson stepped forward. "You've read our papers, even the ones that were rejected for being too speculative." "Especially those," Amanda replied with a smile. "Your quantum slipstream theory. With some refinements, it shows a 30% improvement over our current drive systems." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Then the questions began pouring out, not about the aliens themselves, but about the physics, the technology, the theories that could finally be tested. "We're not here to simply give you technology," Drake explained. "We're here to propose a partnership, your theoretical framework combined with our engineering capabilities. The potential is extraordinary." "You're not worried about contaminating our development?" someone asked. Drake shook his head. "Your science fiction, your theories, your constant reaching for the stars. You've been preparing for this moment for generations. In your minds, you're already out there among the stars. We're just here to help you build the ships your imagination has already designed." Anderson looked around at his team, seeing the same expression on every face. Not fear of the unknown, but eagerness to explore it. "When do we start?" "You already did," Amanda replied. "Every theory, every wild hypothesis, every impossible idea. You've been building the future in your minds for centuries. Now it's time to make those dreams real. Above Earth, the asterisk Eternal Seeker asterisk began its descent, no longer hidden, coming to meet a species that had been reaching for the stars long before they could touch them.